a concept that leads us now into our passage this morning from Matthew chapter 6. A passage where Jesus is telling the people listening to him as he teaches them to check your heart, to examine why they are doing things as opposed to the what that they're doing. And as I began to think about this idea of checking your heart or check your heart, I was initially reminded of a Christian comedian that had this as a catchphrase during some of his comedy bits a few years ago. But as I was sitting down to write, it was not this joke, but a commercial on TV for a small device called a Cardia Mobile that helped me to process the meaning of what Jesus was getting at. Now, perhaps you don't know what this is, or you haven't seen the commercial that have been out recently, but let me explain the impact that it's had on us. During the spring of 2021, coming out of the pandemic, Colleen started to experience some strange health issues, including the racing of her heart, and not just because I was around. This seemed to happen at random moments, even when I wasn't in the room. And it would happen when she was sitting down watching TV, perhaps while she was crocheting, making dinner, times when it wasn't normal for this kind of thing to happen to her. And it was scary for her and for all of us as we tried to help her figure out what was going on and how to look after it. And so the doctors did all the things they could. They booked all the relevant tests that she would need to work through, figuring out what was going on. And ultimately, they did get that under control for her. But while we waited, we did a couple things, giving her the tools to assess what was happening in that moment. And the first was an upgraded Apple Watch that monitors her heart and all of those good things that come with this technology that we have. And the second was we purchased this thing called a Cardia Mobile. And it's a little pocket-sized heart monitor that you take a finger from each hand and you place it on the little pads, and it does an EKG for you in the moment. And we bought it to use during these episodes to help the doctors figure out what might be happening with her heart. And so she would place the fingers, hold for 30 seconds, and it would give a map of what was going on. A simple but effective way to literally check your heart. To see what's going on, to help assess a symptom of perhaps a much larger issue that was happening for her. A process that Jesus was using his words to begin for his disciples and those who had gathered to listen to him on that day. And he was taking 3 different disciplines that had been passed down to the people and using them to assess where they were in their faith, in their lives, to check their hearts. Their heart being defined as at that time as the center of a person's life. It represented the totality of their inner self, the seat of emotions, thoughts, will, and spirit. Now, as we begin, we need to establish a few things at looking at this passage. The first is that each of these practices within themselves was a good thing. The people were encouraged or required to do each of those 3 things. Jesus doesn't say, if you do these things, if you give, if you pray, if you fast. He says, when you do them, assuming that everyone was already partaking. Giving for them was a means of contributing to better the lives of those who were less fortunate within their community, looking after the sick, the orphaned, and the widowed. Without the generosity of others in giving, hundreds in their community would have starved over the course of days, weeks, years, and months. Prayer was a means of stopping in the midst of life, taking moments to be still, to pause and reflect. It was customary at that time that no matter what was happening, at 3 p.m., the people would stop and pray. Prayer was an essential part of their lives, a way of drawing closer to God and staying locked in on his will for their lives. And fasting was a means of reflection and devotion to God. It was to be done as a way to humble themselves in order to gain favor with God. David fasted in the hope that God's anger might be averted and the offspring of his adultery with Bathsheba would be allowed to live. We read that in 2 Samuel 12 and 22. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, required fasting for all people, as we read in Leviticus 16 and 29. And it became a general practice for Palestinian Jews to join in regular community fasts when the fall rains did not appear on schedule. The later the rains, the more frequent they would fast. Each of these disciplines were done to draw the person closer to God, to offer their praise, their worship, their focus on the purposes of God's leading in their lives. They were the what that people were doing, but they were not the way that they could check their heart, the why. No, the way to check their heart was to consider why they were doing it. And it's here that Jesus has an issue with what he's seeing. That these beautiful, life-giving practices have been over time corrupted for personal use. They're being done not with an intention to grow closer to God, to develop a deeper relationship with him, or to see his kingdom come, but to gain a bigger following in the community, so that others can see how pious they were, to gain the praise of people in this life. Now, there is no actual record saying that someone actually gave their offering only after having someone announce it with a trumpet. But the people at that time would have got the point Jesus was trying to make. They would have understood those who were giving to make sure that everyone else around them knew exactly what they were doing and when they were doing it. Because in their time, and perhaps still in our time a little as well, those who gave away the most held the most power. They were the most significant people in the community. So people in their lives were eager for others to see what they were giving in order to grow in their social status with others. For their neighbors to have the knowledge of their earthly kingdom, for it to be on display for everyone else to see. And so Jesus is saying to those listening, if that's the reason why you're doing it, then truly I tell you, you have received your reward in full. But if it's being done to help someone else out, to grow God's kingdom by assisting a brother or sister in need, even when nobody else knows that it's happening, the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, then the reward will come in this life or most certainly in the next. Jesus is not saying don't give to the needy in public. He's saying don't do it in such a way that the glory goes to the one who goes to you instead of the one who blessed you with the ability to give. Do it so it draws the attention to God and not to yourself. And the same goes for the next discipline of Christian life, prayer. Jesus in this passage is not saying don't pray in public, don't engage in corporate prayer. He's not advocating against those things or even praying for a long period of time, as we have record of him praying all night, it says. He is here addressing a practice that had begun to take over in their community, where people would schedule their travel to be in the busiest places at 3 p.m. so everyone could witness them offering their prayers to God. And it's believed when he says in the synagogues and on the street corners is that people would make a spectacle of their prayer, dropping down in a way or blocking the path, not allowing others to pass by, so that they would have to see and hear the prayers that they were lifting up to God. Perhaps it was yelling the words, making them more and more elaborate or eloquent to highlight their ability to share the spoken word in such a powerful and meaningful way. And then Jesus highlights in verse 7 a pagan practice that had begun to enter into their world, where believers would use prayers as a means to try to convince God to give them what they wanted. Repetition to almost try to wear him down into giving them exactly what they said that they needed. Repeating it over and over and over and over again, as we sometimes did as children to our parents, in the hopes that the more we ask, the more likely they are to say yes. There's a commercial that's on now for Maple Leaf Prime Chicken, and at one point it says, this child knows that 12 no's equals 1 yes, because he's a no-gotiator, the commercial reminds us. This is what prayer had become for the people, a wish list, a public performance an opportunity to show off, a desire to make God give them what they wanted. Jesus is saying, don't pray for these reasons. Make it private, even in public. Step back from the busyness of the setting around you. Say those prayers on your own for yourself and to God. Go into a private room, sure, if possible, but if not, say them privately in public as well. Make them about the one you're praying to and not the one who's doing the praying. That prayer was to be communion with God, not the reciting of a wish list or a performance for others to see and to hear. And then he lays out for them a structure that works should they need to know what he's talking about in the Lord's Prayer. A prayer that can be recited in its entirety as written, has been done throughout the history of the church to bring us closer to God, or can be used as a model on how our prayers should be structured. First, to acknowledge the one we're praying to. Second, to make petitions for his kingdom. Hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. Then to make petitions for ourselves. Give us our daily bread. Our debts be forgiven. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. Each section keeping the focus where it should be, on him and his glory and his honor and his worship that we're offering. A key area of focus for the final discipline that Jesus was addressing at that time, fasting. A practice that had begun to be more about performance than piety. Making a spectacle of it, trying to get others to take notice. It had become the practice of people of their time that while they were fasting, they would show the results of that fast to the public. They would go days without cleaning themselves, so they would smell as someone would who had been fasting. They would add dirt to their face and to their clothes to show how disheveled they were and the effects of this fast that had been going on. Jesus is saying, if you're going to partake in this for the purpose of humbling yourself for God, then make sure nobody knows about it. Put oil on your head, splash water on your face. He's telling them, maintain your normal appearance so others would have no idea that you're in the middle of the fast. Jesus is saying that in all of these disciplines, they needed to make the main thing the main thing. Worship, honor, and praise to God. And to figure out if they were doing this, they needed to check their heart. To really get down to the heart, the purpose of why they were doing it. To ask themselves the difficult question, if nobody knows it's happening or it has happened, would they still do it? If the answer is no, the heart is corrupted. The focus is in the wrong place. If the answer is yes, the heart is pure. The focus is where it should be. Jesus was challenging the people in that moment to check their heart. And this morning, as we take time to pause and reflect on this passage, he's asking us, you and me, to do the same thing. For me to check my heart. For you to check your heart. For us as a church family here at Oshawa Temple to check our collective hearts and to test that against the heart of God. To spiritually test the rhythm of our hearts to make sure that it beats along to the same rhythm as his. To view the things that we're doing in honor, worship, praise, and service to God and to consider the why we're choosing to do them. That we should be giving back to him and to others. We should be offering our talents in service to his kingdom. We should be praying to him each and every day, engaging and reading his word. We should be caring for the less fortunate, loving our neighbors, taking time during Lent to sacrifice for the benefit of others. I'm not going to say that we shouldn't do these things or that if we do these things, but that we should be doing them all. But that we need to stop in the midst of it and ask ourselves the question, when I'm doing them, why? Why am I doing it, and what am I hoping to gain from it? If I'm giving to feel better about myself or to show how much I have, if I'm sacrificing at Lent so others can see how spiritual I am on my social media accounts to glorify myself, I need to check my heart. If you're using your talents here and in other places to gain the praise of people, offering them so others can see how skillful you are, or how beautifully you can perform a song, or how eloquently you can share the spoken word, doing it to gain the praise of people, you need to check your heart. And if we're praying for others to hear, dragging it out to see who can pray for the longest, or say the biggest words, or read the word for others to see how well we memorize it, or the amount we can recite, or the ways we can use it to weaponize or monetize it for our purposes, we need to check our hearts. We need to get back, as we sang earlier this morning, to the heart of worship. To take our fingers and place them back on the pulse of God's heart and to assess where we stand in comparison. To see if our heart, your heart, my heart beats in the same way to the same rhythm of God's. And if not, to make those changes that we need to bring us back into good heart health. To refocus our eyes on his purpose, to recenter our lives onto his way, to reorient our prayer life, our work life, our ministries, our families, ourselves to offering him praise. To make sure we are headed in the right direction, that we're hitting the right notes, seeking the glory of the right kingdom and living for the right reasons. To take a few moments today and every day to check our heart.